rain continues. Joining me live now is the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar. Thanks so much for your time. What we're seeing here, partly, extraordinary weather events, but a failure of mitigation as well.
Look, there's no doubt, Laura, that the only way to build long-term resilience for lots of communities, whether it's communities that face cyclone risk or, as we see here, communities that face flooding risk, is mitigation and building that resilience. That's the long-term answer. There's no doubt about it. We are seeing, as you said, claims increasing exponentially. So yes, it's 60,000, 46,000 of those were Queensland, 14,000 for New South Wales, and obviously we'll see those claims for New South Wales, or for both really, increasing quite exponentially. But the concern, as you say, in these instances is always people who either don't have insurance who are underinsured, those people who don't have some form of critical aspect to their policy, for example, flood cover.
Do you have a read on how many people won't have insurance? Because we hear that residents in areas around Lismore, it costs them $20,000 a year to insure their home. Some businesses, it's $200,000, and these businesses don't even make that much money.
Yeah, so the data is obviously data that's held by the insurance companies, and they have their best estimates. I mean, when the ACCC had a look at lack of insurance or underinsurance throughout the whole country, it sits at anywhere from 10 to 12% and tends to be slightly more acute in areas that are either, as I said, cyclone or flood affected. So I'd expect it would be more than that, but ultimately those estimates, so to speak, are best determined by the insurance companies. I mean, pleasingly, we are seeing claims coming in very quickly. They're already, to some extent, being dealt with in Queensland. There are assessors now on the ground in some parts of Queensland, and obviously once floodwaters subside in New South Wales, I'm certain that there will be assessors on the ground very quickly there. Floods are particularly difficult. The cleanup after a flood is, to some extent, like no other, and a little more labour intensive than other natural disasters.
Well, let's talk about mitigation. Why hasn't the government spent more money? You have it set aside, $5 billion, but only a fraction of that has been spent. Why?
Well, the National Disaster and Resiliency Agency is really a body that's taking up this work now, and I think it's a really important thing that we've established that agency. It obviously has to work very closely with all levels of government, obviously local government and state governments, who are ultimately the parties that determine planning and zoning and the communities with which these natural disasters occur. So as you would appreciate, Laura, the minute you have tiers of government having to agree on projects and agree on mitigation strategies, but we've put in place significant programs, both for cyclone risk and for flood risk. But these are big long-term infrastructure projects often. If you're talking about a levee, talking about increased drainage, these are projects that ultimately the government is always ready to support, but we have to always work closely with the state and local governments involved, because after all, they're the ones who build and operate and ultimately approve the communities and the planning and zoning that falls within them.
Look, I get that, but it sounds like these tiers of government are just getting in the way of each other. In the meantime, nothing gets done, and it's the people who suffer. This should be an election issue, shouldn't it?
Well, Laura, what we have done in a slightly different context is seek to help turbocharge some of the solutions, as you've said. We've set up the Northern Australia reinsurance pool, which will commence on the 1st of July. Now, admittedly, that deals with cyclone risk in the north of Australia, but explicitly in its mandate, we have put in place a process whereby any excess funds, any profits should be diverted into mitigation projects. It becomes a almost virtuous cycle of savings from the reinsurance pool get put into fortifying those communities even further.
Okay, you're talking about cyclones. Doesn't the remit need to be expanded then to flood-affected areas?
Well, I'm using that as an example, Laura, just to, in a sense, demonstrate that, the model you've spoken about is being used. I mean, the ACCC, when it conducted its review found that cyclone risk was causing the most problems and followed by flood risk not far afterwards. So, I think given we've had, such devastating floods really 2 years in a row, that there's no doubt that the funding that we are providing will need to find agreement with relevant state governments and local governments to get these projects happening. I agree with you.
What are you going to do to get more building material more quickly? We know that there's been massive supply chain issues even before these floods hit. What is in your capacity to do there?
Well, Laura, at the moment, the insurance companies are telling us that it's not so much the materials, although you're right, there are pressures there, and there've been pressures there for a little while. But labour will be a concern. The construction industry, residential construction, has already been extraordinarily busy around the country. So there are some options we're looking at as far as fast-tracking visas for some workers who will be able to come in and help meet the task. It's going to be a really big, not just clean-up task, but as you say, rebuilding task with very highly skilled individuals. So we're looking at how we can fast-track some of that in. Admittedly, the insurers, having dealt with similar issues just 12 months ago, I think have done a lot of work in ensuring that they have access to the labour and the materials they need. I think, Laura, a second round impact might be what impact it has, on the broader market, because this work will quite rightly be prioritised, and we'll do everything we have to do in order to alleviate any stress or pressure that they have in meeting those requirements, either with labour or with material.
Yeah, it all sounds very expensive. Michael Sukkar, thanks for your time. We'll speak soon.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Well, Quad